So I have a 14-year-old son, and life with a teenager is always interesting and entertaining, to say the very least. But one of my husband and my favorite things that just we get a kick out of that our son does is he will come at us and be like, "What would you do if?" And there's always this crazy scenario he's come up with. So like, what would you do if, like, I just got bit by a spider and I turned into Spider-Man? Or what would you do if you're out in the woods and you're being attacked by a wolf and all you have is a hair clip? Like, what would you do? And you're like, what? And there are always these crazy scenarios, but they also kind of get you thinking. So I have a what would you do for you guys today. So what would you do if you're a person in a foreign land and the king of the whole nation, who is super, super powerful, says for you to do something and you don't want to do it? What would you do? Because you don't feel like it's right to do. And let's just up it a notch, okay? Because he's always kicking it up for us. What would you do if he said, if you don't do it, I say, you'll just burn to death? Yeah. Would you do it then? Even if you knew it was wrong with God? That's what we're going to look at today. So turn to Daniel chapter 3, and we'll see what God says to do. So this is kind of an exciting one. There's a lot of drama. So Daniel chapter 3, we're going to pick it up in verse 1. Nebuchadnezzar the king, this is the king of Babylon, made an image of gold, whose height was 80 cubits, and the breadth thereof 6 cubits. So this thing is huge. It's about 90 feet high and 9 feet wide. That is huge, and it's gold. And we don't know if it's solid gold or if it's dipped in gold, but it is bright and shiny, and it is definitely imposing. We don't know what the image is of, but it's, you know, a false idol, so you can only imagine the things that it could be. So it's the breadth of 6 cubits, and he set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent to gather together the princes, the governors, the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and just all of the rulers of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. So he has this idea for this golden image that he's built, and it's huge. And he decides that just everyone in the nation needs to see it. Anybody who has a position of authority or rulership or importance, he's like, gather them all up, let's bring them all out here. So then the princes, the governors, the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and just all of the rulers of the provinces were gathered together unto the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up, and they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Are we getting the point that he's like pretty proud of this idea that he's come up with? He set it up, and he really, like, they want us to know that this is his beautiful brainchild, right? He's concocted this false idol, this god to be worshipped. And he's brought all the people here for this dedication. Verse 4, then an herald cried aloud, to you it is commanded, O people, nations and languages, that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, maybe you've got Dylan on the ukulele, Mike's on his guitar. When you hear all of the music, you fall down and you worship this golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king has set up. So no big deal, guys. Just, we're going to have like a music circle. It's going to go off, you know, you're going to start it over here. When you hear the sound, you start it over here. The music's going to travel around this whole area so that people from just all over can just fall down and worship this false idol that I've set up instead of the true God. No big deal. And then whosoever falleth not down in worship shall the same hour be cast in the midst of a burning fiery furnace. Like, whatever. You're just going to burn to death if you don't do it. No big deal. So this is the great thing that he set up. Therefore, at that time, when all the people heard the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and all kinds of music, all the people, the nations, and the languages fell down and worshipped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. So he's told them that they need to do this. And he's made this, I don't want to say threat because he means it, but he's told everyone that if you don't do it, you are going to burn. And that really quickly instilled fear in people. And fear is a great motivator to get people to do what you want. And we've seen in history all kinds of evil rulers use fear to control people to do what they want. And a lot of horrible things are done in the name of fear because when it gets down to it, humans will really do almost anything to live. It's just kind of our nature. We want to survive, right? But here they're faced with this rule that they have to do this, and it's in worship of a false god. You know, it's not like, well, hey, everyone has to wear black shoes, and you're like, I don't love black shoes, but I'll wear them. It's like you are worshiping a false god, and that is just the worst thing that you can do in the eyes of the one true God. So these people all just, it seems like, go along with it. They've set it up, and they hear the sound, and they all fall down and worship this golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. And verse 8 says, wherefore at that time certain Chaldeans came near and accused the Jews. So the Chaldeans, these are people that are native to Babylon. And it's at this time that they come forth and they accuse the Jews. So who are these Jews that we're talking about here? Let's see, we'll give a little quick history lesson. These are Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they're friends with Daniel. And you might remember Daniel from the story of Daniel in the lion's den. There's a lot of crazy things that are happening at this time. And so these guys were captives from Judea, that when the king first took over, he captured these people, and Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were among them. Although they had different names, their names were later changed to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So when the king first took over, he said, I want for the prince of the eunuch to gather up the very best men that we've captured. I want like the cream of the crop. Turn to Daniel chapter 1, verse 4. And this is what the king wanted. He wanted children in whom was no blemish, but well favored, and skillful in all wisdom, and cunning in knowledge, and understanding science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. So it was like not much he wanted, just like the very best, the brightest, the smartest, the sharpest, and they could learn another language and like work really hard, just no big deal. So they gather up what they feel is the cream of the crop. And what the king says is, okay, get these men together for training, and what we're going to do is we're going to feed them meat and wine, and they're going to get really strong, and then after a certain time, you're going to bring these men before me, and I'm going to see who I like. Well, the problem is that the meat that they're feeding them is killed and sacrificed to false gods, and Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego do not want to eat this meat that was in sacrifice of false gods. It says they don't want to defile themselves. So these are good guys, and the captain of the eunuchs, he really likes them. It says that they had found favor with him. So Daniel comes up and he says, hey, you know, we don't want to eat this meat and drink this wine. We were wondering if we could just eat pulse, which is like vegetables, and just drink water. And we would be really good with that. And he's like, I'm not really supposed to, because the king was pretty specific on what you guys are eating and drinking in your training mode. But I'll tell you what, we'll do like a 10-day trial. And at the end of the 10 days, if you're just wasting away, you'll do it my way. So the 10 days come, and at the end, they go before him, and it says that they are stronger and fatter than everyone else just eating this pulse and drinking this water. So he says, okay, so for the duration of your training, you guys can just keep doing that. Turn to Daniel chapter 1, verse 19. So the time comes that they come before the king. And the king communed with them, and among them all was found none like Daniel, Hananiah, that's Shadrach, Mishael, that's Meshach, and Azariah, that's Abednego, there stood they before the king. And in all matters of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were in all of his realm. So these guys are pretty impressive. They're really great guys, and they're guys who love God, and they put God first. So he keeps these guys around. And then about a year passes, and you're going through Daniel, and this king, he dreams a dream. And he does not know what this dream means, but he knows there's some real significance to this dream. And so he calls his astrologers and magicians and all of his wise men, and he says, like, interpret this dream for me. And if you can't interpret the dream for me, no big deal, I'll just kill you. So the Chaldeans come, and they're like, we definitely can. And they hear it, and they're like, oh, we can't, sorry. And the king puts out a decree that all of the wise men will just be killed, which includes Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And so the word goes out like, hey, just gather up all the wise men. We're just going to kill them. And Daniel's like, wait 1 minute, because it says in the word that when they kept God first and they didn't eat the meat and drink the wine, that God blessed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and Daniel with wisdom, and that Daniel was given the ability to interpret dreams. And so Daniel says, like, bring me before the king, let me and my guys come. And he goes to the king and he's like, I can pray and God will show me what this dream means. And so he does. And so then go to Daniel chapter 2, verse 48. Then the king made Daniel a great man and gave him many great gifts and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and chief of the governors over all the wise men of Babylon. So the king is really thankful that Daniel could interpret this dream for him. And verse 49, then Daniel requested of the king, and he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. So he's getting promoted, and he's like, I want my guys to be promoted too. I want them to be these top guys that I work with. And the king is so pleased and happy. And so these 3 guys get promoted. And that's kind of where the problem begins, because they're captives of war. And they are not like the people that the people of the nation thought should be ruling them. They thought it should be their best and brightest. And my guess is that quite a bit of jealousy starts to creep in. So they're watching them, right? Like when people are jealous, they're kind of always just waiting for you to fail. They're just watching you, looking like, oh, when they mess up, just wait, because I'll be there ready to jump in. And so they've been watching, and they've been waiting, and now they think, here comes the time. These Jews, they've finally messed up, and the people are about to tell. So let's get back to Daniel chapter 3, verse 8. Wherefore at that certain time Chaldeans came near and accused the Jews. They spake and said to the king Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. Thou, O king, hast made a decree that every man shall hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut. Man, you really put the music together beautifully, by the way. Like, I am just digging all of it. The psaltery, the dulcimer, all kinds of music. And then when it happens, I think it was you, King, who said that we should fall down and worship that golden image that you made, right? That's what you said, right? And they're kind of like buttering up the king. And they're like, you made that great music, and you made that decree, that cool golden statue, and we're all supposed to fall down and worship it. Isn't that what you said? And whoso falleth not down and worshipeth it, that he should be cast into the midst of a fiery furnace. I believe that's the rest of what you said. Well, there are certain Jews, verse 12, whom thou hast set over the affairs of province, Babylon. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, these men that, gosh, you promoted them even when they didn't even deserve it. You just lifted them up, and they serve not thy gods, nor worship the golden image that thou hast set up. So they're like really getting him riled up now. They're like, we think you're so great. Like, live forever, and you're just amazing. But like, these guys, they don't care about you at all. They're going against what you're saying, and they're bringing about a really emotional response out of the king. They're really like getting to him, and it's working because Let's see. Verse 13, then Nebuchadnezzar, in his rage and fury, commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then they brought these men before the king. And Nebuchadnezzar spake and said unto them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Do ye not serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up? He's like, is this really true? Because he likes these guys. You know, they're probably really good at their jobs, and they're there for him when he needs them. And, you know, they're a good bunch. And he's kind of giving them one more shot to, like, change their tune of what's going on here. So in verse 15, he says, Now if ye be ready, that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and dulcimer, and all kinds of music, if ye fall down and worship the image which I have made, well, great. We'll just pretend this never happened. We can kind of all just move on from this, and that's fine if you guys are willing to do that. But if ye worship not, ye shall be cast the same hour into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands? He's like, do you know who I am? I am the king of Babylon, one of the greatest nations. I am so powerful. And if you don't do what I say, I'm going to burn you. And who's your God that's going to deliver you from me and all that I can do? So he's definitely putting the pressure on for these guys right now. And they have a choice to make. So verse 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said unto the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. If it be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. They're like, we aren't scared to tell you. We're not hesitant. We're not slow to say. We will not bow. We will not worship your false god. We will not compromise or bend in any way on this, because we know who our God is. And our God backs us up. And our God will deliver us out of thine hand. Verse 18, but if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image with which thou hast set up. And he says, even if God wasn't going to deliver me, if all else failed in the whole world, I still wouldn't worship your golden image. I am still not going to compromise. I am not going to do that to my God. Well, you can imagine that the king's not pleased. Then was Nebuchadnezzar full of fury, and the form of his visage was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He had liked these guys. He thought they were great. You know, they were useful to him. And when they're useful to him, he likes them. Well, now they have embarrassed him. They have gone against him. They have gone against what he has said, and he doesn't like them anymore. And he doesn't have that soft spot for them anymore, and he's done. And he commanded that they should heat the furnace 7 times more than it was wont to be heated. It was already hot enough to do its job. But he's mad. And he said, you're really going to pay now. And so he says, heat the furnace up 7 times more. And he commanded the most mighty men that were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. So he's not taking any chances at this point. He's like, get my best men, my most capable, powerful men on this case. And then, besides the fact that we're going to throw them into this fiery furnace, let's bind them. We're just not going to take any chances that they're going to make a run for it or escape or anything in any way like that. We're going to bind them up. And verse 21, these men were bound in their coats, their hosen, and their hats, and their other garments. So he says, maybe that's not quite enough. Let's put everything flammable that they own on their bodies, and we'll just make sure that they're wearing hats and all of these things that will quickly catch fire, and we'll just bind them up, and we'll just throw them in. And verse 21, and they were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. So there they go. And therefore, because the king's commandment was urgent and the furnace exceeding hot, the flame of the fire slew those men that took Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So the fire is literally so hot that when they get close enough to shove these guys into the fiery furnace, the fire like comes up with its heat and like slews them. Like they're just gone immediately. That's how hot it is. And the three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down, bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. And that's where the story ends. No. But I was reading this and I was thinking, you know, these guys were convinced that God was going to deliver them, right? And they knew who their God was and that they were standing up for him and that he was going to deliver them. But what if they had concocted an idea in their own minds of how he was going to deliver them, right? They're like, he's going to deliver us. And what's probably going to happen is, like, at the last minute, the cavalry's going to come in. You know, Daniel's going to, like, show up with his men, and they're going to fight. And the king's going to be so surprised that, like, he says, just get out of here and don't ever come back. And what if they had convinced themselves that's how it was going to go down? And then they get shoved in. And on their way down, what if they're like, God, you didn't do it. You failed me. Like, I believed in you. I thought you were going to take care of me, and you failed me. And then they just stop trusting in God, stop believing, because a lot of people do things like that. You pray for something, and you're sure that God's going to do it the certain way that you come up with. And you're like, I'm going to get healed, and all it's going to take is the sunshine's going to shine on me at a 45-degree angle, and, like, I'm going to be healed. And, you know, when it doesn't happen, you're like, God doesn't work, and he doesn't answer prayers. But these guys, you know, they continue to trust in God. And they had said, even if they weren't delivered, it was still worth it for them to stand up for God because they knew their God and they knew who he was. But let's see what does happen. Then, verse 24, Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished and rose up in haste and spake and said unto his counselors, did not we cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? And they said, O king, it's true, we sure did. Just like you said, we bound them up, we threw them in there. And the king answered and said, lo, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. And he's like, oh my gosh, something's happening. And then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the mouth of the burning fire. He comes close, but not so close that he gets burned up too, okay? He's seen what happens. And he spake and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, ye servants of the what? Most high God, come forth and come hither. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came forth of the midst of the fire. These guys just walked right out of the fire. And the princes and the governors and the captains and the kings, the counselors, being gathered together, you know, he'd already gathered all these men because he wanted them to come and see this golden image that he'd made and worship it. But then all this commotion started going on with these guys not listening. And have you ever seen, like, an accident or your neighbor getting arrested and, like, everybody comes out and they're kind of like, what's happening here? So all these guys are like, there's going to be a burning today. Like, they're gathered around. And then all of a sudden, they're all there and they see these guys, these men upon whose bodies the fire had no power, nor was a hair of their head singed, neither were their coats changed, nor the smell of fire had passed on them. So, you know, like, I was straightening my hair the other day and I left that straightener just like a little too long and my hair started to sizzle. Like, I'm not even joking. It was just like sort of like burning. And, you know, that was like 30 seconds. And we were just last week at a birthday party and there was a campfire. And my clothes reek of campfire now. Fire is very strong smelling. And they're saying literally being thrown into the fire, none of the hairs on their head were burnt. And their clothes literally didn't even smell like fire. Because that's how amazing God is. That's how big God's protection is. It's more than our minds could even comprehend. Then Nebuchadnezzar spake and said, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who had sent his angel and delivered his servants that trusted in him, and have changed the king's word. And that's a big deal. This king is a prideful man. He's willing to burn people that just go against what he says. He didn't even, like, hesitate. And he's saying publicly in front of all these looky-loos who've gathered around, like, this has changed my mind. This has changed my life. And he says, You have changed the king's word and yielded their bodies that they might not serve nor worship any god except their own God. These guys have stood up to me. They have stood up for their own God. Therefore, verse 29, I make a decree that every people, nation, and language which speak anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut into pieces. He is, you know, someone who's got a little bit of flair for the drama, but he's kind of on the right side of things now, at least, right? And he says their houses shall be made a dunghill because there is no other God that can deliver after this sort. And he's right. There is no other God, period. But there is nothing that could deliver the people out of that fire, that could do the things that God does. Right. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. So they're pulled out of this fire, right? Yep. They are commended, and then they're promoted even higher than the positions that they had. And their stand for God literally changed an entire nation, because no longer are people being forced to worship a false god. And then the knowledge of the one true God and what he's done is going out and spreading across the nation. This story is going to spread. You can guarantee something like that people are going to hear about. And people will know that God is a faithful God, that God delivers. They will know that when you serve God with your whole heart, God backs you up. God loves his people, and he is not going to do any less for you than he did for them. You know, this is in the Old Testament, and these are people who absolutely loved God and served God, but we are sons of God. If you believe Romans 10, 9, and 10, that Jesus Christ was raised from the dead, you're born again and you're God's kid. If he would do it for them, he would do it for you in any different category. And it's just amazing to see how God's faithfulness is always there, that we don't have to succumb to fear. We don't have to bow. We don't have to compromise. We can be bold and proud in this world to stand for God. So when a situation comes up of what would you do? Remember these guys and remember how standing for God in that situation or looking to God in that situation makes all of the difference.